For decades, there's been this massive assumption in global education, one that affects millions of students every single year. We've relied on these simple language tests to decide who's ready for university. But what if we've been measuring the wrong thing this whole time? Let's dive into what it really takes to succeed.
So here's the question we've all been asking forever. Is better English the real key to academic success? For the longest time, the answer seemed like a no-brainer. Of course it is. You're studying in English, so your English skills have to be the most important thing, right? Well, it turns out the real story is a lot more complicated. Our obsession with simple proficiency might have been a huge blind spot.
For a long, long time, the world of English medium instruction, that's EMI for short, was totally fixated on this one thing. They called it the proficiency puzzle. And the core idea was super simple. The single biggest challenge for international students was just learning the English language.
Yeah, this slide pretty much sums up the old way of thinking. On the left, you've got the assumption that basically every institution, every researcher, and every teacher made, if a student is struggling, well, it's got to be a language problem. And the solution was always the same. Just give them more English classes. But the reality? Oh, it's so much deeper than that.
This quote from researcher Jim McKinley just hits the nail on the head. The entire system was built on this one simple idea. I'm talking entrance exams, support programs, everything. The whole strategy was to give students better English and then just assume that academic success would magically follow.
But here's the thing. Things weren't really adding up. People who were actually in the classroom started to see this major disconnect, and researcher Jim McKinley, well, he was one of them. Through his work, he started to see the very first cracks in this long-held theory.
So, while he was teaching in Japan, McKinley noticed something kind of weird. He had students who had fantastic English test scores, but they were still struggling in his classes. Not with grammar, not with vocabulary, but with the thinking that goes into academic writing. The whole language problem idea just didn't explain why they couldn't build a solid argument or critically analyze a text.
And this table right here just makes it so incredibly clear. Look at these student challenges. Not knowing how to structure an argument, that's way more about logic than just language. Being unfamiliar with how to cite sources, that has absolutely nothing to do with verb tenses. And being hesitant to take a critical stance, that's all about understanding academic culture. See, these aren't language problems, they're literacy problems.
And that very realization that it was about so much more than just knowing the words led to this completely new, much more powerful idea. It's not about the words you have in your vocabulary, it's about what you're expected to actually do with them.
So this is it. This is the key concept, academic literacy. It's not just about speaking English fluently. It's about knowing all the unwritten rules of the academic game. You know, how to build an argument, how to question assumptions, and how to contribute to knowledge just like a scholar does. Think about it like this. Having a great vocabulary is like having a giant pile of high-quality bricks. That's great, but academic literacy, that's what makes you the architect who knows how to use those bricks to build a strong, solid structure. One without the other is, well, it's just a pile of bricks.
And it gets even more specific. We can actually drill down another level. I mean, the way you write a history paper is completely different from how you'd write a chemistry lab report, right? That's where the idea of disciplinary literacy comes in. Every single field has its own unique language, its own rules, its own way of making a case.
And here are some perfect examples of what I mean. In science, you write a lab report. It's all about objective data and procedures. In business, you might analyze a case study, applying specific models to solve a problem. And in the humanities, you interpret a historical source, looking for things like context and bias. 3 totally different skills, all happening in English, but each one demanding a completely different kind of literacy.
Okay, so this whole shift from proficiency to literacy, it isn't just a nice little theory. It's actually backed by hard data now. The latest research is proving what people like McKinley were seeing in their classrooms all along.
And here is the absolute bombshell. You know those standardized tests like TOEFL and IELTS that we've used as gatekeepers for decades? Well, it turns out they are surprisingly bad at predicting who will actually succeed in their studies. A high test score does not automatically mean a high GPA.
This chart really says it all. A recent study found that while English test scores have a small effect, the single biggest predictor of a student's success is their prior knowledge and learning experience. In other words, how familiar are they already with the ways of academic thinking? That's what really matters. And it's not just one study. You can see here you've got multiple research teams all coming to the same conclusion. Test scores, weak predictors. Things like a student's motivation and their prior knowledge, absolutely decisive. The evidence is overwhelming. We have been focusing on the wrong thing. So the old model is clearly broken, which brings us to the really big question. What on earth do we do about it? Because fixing this means fundamentally changing how universities have been doing things for a very, very long time.
The new path forward seems to involve a few key shifts. First, institutions have got to move beyond their total reliance on test scores. Then, literacy support needs to be woven directly into regular subject classes, not just stuck off in some separate department. This means language teachers and subject teachers have to actually work together, and all professors, all of them, need to start being really explicit about those hidden academic rules.
At the end of the day, what this is really calling for is a major culture shift. This can't be seen as just an English problem for one department to handle. Developing academic literacy has to become a shared responsibility across the entire institution. It's about teaching students not just what to think, but how to think like a member of the academic community.
And this brings us to the biggest takeaway of all. Because this isn't just about teaching methods anymore. This is about fairness, it's about equity, and it's about the entire structure of global education as we know it.
I mean, think about it for a second. When we define preparedness as just one very specific, often Western style of communication, we're basically acting as gatekeepers. Some researchers argue this actually reinforces a kind of educational neocolonialism, where one way of thinking and writing is implicitly treated as the only correct way.
And this final quote from Jim McKinley just brings it all home, shifting our focus from simple proficiency to this broader idea of academic literacy. Well, it's not just a better way to teach, it's a moral imperative. It is a necessary step toward building a truly inclusive and equitable model for education all around the world.
So we're left with this question. Once we get past the idea of simple language tests, we have to ask ourselves, how do we build classrooms that aren't just English-speaking, but are truly equitable? How do we value the diverse knowledge that all students bring with them and truly prepare them to succeed in this complex, globalized world? That right there is the real puzzle we need to solve.